Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. If I was to ask you right now, what do you think the chances are in the next 12 months of some sort of significant event that changes our day to day lives, whether it's another pandemic, whether it's a big cyber attack, a grid down scenario? I think for a lot of you, especially those that are watching this show, you'd probably say it's pretty likely. Now, I think maybe there's also Americans that would say, no, look, this is America and we're going to be okay. And we've got the military and the government. But if you're like me, you don't trust those things. So there's been some pretty big developments in this space of potential disasters. So there's been some interesting things happening with our own grid. And I'll be diving into that. One thing in particular and this is something that's new to me, so I covered this early on. I'll play the video for you all on the show today, that after Biden took office, he canceled a lot of Trump's executive orders. One of the executive orders that he canceled was an EO that Trump put out that forbade any hostile foreign countries or foreign actors from having any access to our power grid, right? Like, for instance, he banned China from selling us Chinese transformers. Well, what happened? So in 2019, I think it was a governmental agency had a transformer that they literally discovered had a back door in it where China could turn off the transformer. So we're talking the technology that allows China to turn off our power grid with the press of a button, basically from China. So this is really, really, really significant. And so joining us today is my friend, John Hollerman, who has the company Grid Down Consulting. He's an author. I've had him on many times before. He's one of the experts, honestly, one of the top experts in America when it pertains to grid down scenarios, specifically EMP attack, et cetera. But he's also someone that has a vast and impressive knowledge about preparedness and how to be prepared. And so we're going to be talking about the Chinese grid infrastructure, how all that works, but also his business, Grid Down Consulting. What he does is he works with really high net worth families. We're talking like, Forbes or Fortune 500, Forbes, top 100 list. So like, billionaire families. And he works on designing survival retreats, which is kind of an interesting and probably a really fun job. But he has families that come to him and say, look, we have an unlimited budget, right? Tens of millions of dollars to build a survival retreat for our family. And so as he'll be detailing, what he's explained is in the last, say, 8 or so months, he has seen almost a tenfold increase in people reaching out to him with a common thread being they want to get something built before November. So we're going to be talking about this because it's foreshadowing something that could be very significant. So folks, please enjoy the interview with Jonathan Hollerman. Scenario. I think Mr. Jonathan Hollerman, countries it's great to have you back on. It's been a little while and there is a lot to catch up on. So thank you for being here with us today.
It's my pleasure as always, Seth.
So before we dive in, and I gave you an introduction in the intro to the show, but I'll let you just give us like the quick elevator pitch on you and what your focus is, because I think that you bring a lot of background knowledge that's really pertinent to today's conversation. So I'll let you just introduce yourself in your own words as well.
Sure. So currently I'm the Deputy Director at the U.S. Task Force on National and Homeland Security. It's a congressional advisory board under the EMP caucus in Congress. I am also the owner and CEO of Grid Down Consulting. I work with high net worth families and help them prepare for the hard times to come. I am a former United States Air Force senior instructor. It stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. And I'm a #1 best-selling author in survival and emergency preparedness and experimental psychology. So that's kind of my background on this.
Well, there we go. Thank you for that. That was the elevator pitch. I'll tell folks that your books, which are on here, and you can find them on Amazon, you can find them on your website, griddownconsulting.com, but especially your fiction series, EMP, Equipping Modern Patriots, is one of my favorite. I've actually listened to the entire series a couple times through, and it's just great. And actually, this book right here, Survival Theory, A Preparedness Guide, was one of the really formative books that I discovered and read on being prepared. I think I probably got it. It was maybe 8 years ago or something like that. I forget when it was. I came across that, but it was a major, major thing for me. So it's been really great getting to know you and interview you because you're one of my favorite authors. So diving into today's show, there's a lot that we're going to be talking about, but one of the key topics that we'll be getting into is our grid. and specifically the influence that China has over our grid, and even more specifically, an executive order that Trump passed to basically to keep the terrorists and aggressive countries off of our grid, and then Biden undoing that. And so to get us started, though, I actually so I'll pull a video up that one of the first videos that we did after our initial video was about this exact thing. It was like when Biden just got back into office and all the concerns about his ties to China. So I'm going to play like about a one or two, maybe 2 minute clip from that video. And keep in mind, this was 3 years ago that this video was put out, but it's hyper relevant today as we're going to be getting into. So I'll play this first and then we'll get into our discussion. What do you imagine when you hear about the power grid going down? Flashlights and candles, perhaps a quick calculation of how much gas you'll need for the generator, if you even have one. But how about if the grid went down for a week, or a month, or even 6 months? According to former CIA Director James Woolsey, if the power grid went down for 12 months, we're talking about total devastation. We're not talking about just a regular catastrophe. According to his team's estimates, within a year or so, roughly 60 to 90% of us would no longer be here. That's how serious it is. Did you know that back in 2018, the Department of Homeland Security warned us that the US power grid is a prime target for terrorists? Could that be why Trump declared it a national emergency? Mid last year, he signed an executive order called Securing the United States Bulk Power System, which was followed by more orders specifically aimed at reducing risks posed by, guess who? The People's Republic of China. So why, on his first day in office, was Biden in such a rush to put a stop to this order? Can anyone explain this to me? Shouldn't a national security issue that poses a grave risk to our economy, our health, and our safety go beyond party politics? Wouldn't the first step towards a fair and equitable society be making sure we can all stay alive? So, well, tongue in cheek, but that was it. I remember researching and when you first got in office and thinking, like, why on earth would this executive order be undone? That in this executive order, basically protecting our grid from countries like China. So I'm going to hand this back to you to walk us through where we're at right now. Basically, what's the status of our grid and China's involvement with our grid after these couple of short years under Biden. So I'll hand it over to you.
Sure. So to start out with, as a deputy director at the EMP task force, we work with both sides of the aisle. Protecting the American people and trying to get a hardened electric grid should be a nonpartisan issue. So I want to be careful ascribing motive where I have no proof of motive on certain things, right? So I'm just going to fire away and give you kind of the backstory of how this all started. So I was also a member of the Electromagnetic Defense Task Force, which was a joint services wargaming operation that looked at a long-term grid down event. All the military branches, all your alphabet agencies, the DOE, DHS, NSC, CIA, NSA, all those groups were there. There were some electric utility engineers, and we basically wargamed the effects of a long-term nationwide grid down event at the LeMay Wargaming Institute at Maxwell Air Force Base, and that was a really eye-opening experience. And but that was kind of my first introduction and where I kind of first heard about the fact that these Chinese transformers had started kind of infiltrating America. So to give a little background, our Achilles heel in this country are the high voltage transformers. Depending on where you draw the line, there's about 3,000 of them in this country. And for the last 20 to 40 years, we've been buying them from South Korea and Germany, which are allied nations. They're 400-ton behemoths. At present time, they take 36 months to build. They are built for each site specifically. So you can't just grab one from another location and bring it into that location because they're made for each location. So that's kind of been the background. And as America's Achilles heel, if we lose the high voltage transformers, we're not getting the first one for 36 months. So when we talk about after a long-term grid down event from an EMP, a large solar flare, possibly cyber attack, we're talking about at minimum of 3 years before the first transformer. And you can't produce electricity and transmit it across long line transmission lines without these step up and step down transformers. So that is the big issue. And that's really what the EMP Commission, number one, is really trying to get the government to harden for a long period of time, and the utilities. So with that said, that they mainly came from Germany and South Korea. And then all of a sudden, here about I was roughly 8 or 9 years ago, China basically threw their hat in the ring as far as the high voltage transformer market in America. There's a company called JSHP. I'm not going to try to pronounce what those initials stands for, but JSHP is one of the largest transformer countries in the transformer companies in the world in China. They supply a lot of transformers all around the globe, and they are just like any major, especially utility company in China. They are largely beholden to the CCP. Okay, they are basically take their marching orders. JSHP opened an American company in California here, like I said, probably around 10 years ago. And they started selling their high voltage transformers or their medium transformers or whatever they're selling at a fairly discounted rate compared to what we were getting from Germany and South Korea. And so the utility companies jumped on this and they started buying high voltage transformers and installing them all around the country. And there's charts, there's a FERC filing by Chief Master Sergeant Michael Mabey from Grid Security Now. I would recommend everybody go there because the stuff we're talking about, that's all in this FERC filing, all the evidence, all the pictures. And what you can see from his charts is that the Chinese transformers, year after year, they just start installing more and more and more. Well, I think it was September of 2019, for whatever reason, we confiscated one of these transformers at the port and we sent it to Sandia National Laboratory, and they basically deconstructed that high voltage transformer. And what they found in there, we know some of what they found, but what we know is they had the ability remotely to shut down or destroy that transformer remotely at any given point in time.
Wow. So I'll jump in really quickly here. This is
Sure.
like this is such a key thing, right? So here, this is what you're talking about right here. So the U.S. government seized a Chinese manufactured transformer. So in the article, it says on May 27, 2020, there is a report that came out that a large transformer was purchased by the Western Area Power Authority from Jiangsu Huapeng Transformer Company. And that what they said, this is what's crazy. It says, so in an interview on July 16th, 2021, Sadler, the former director of intelligence programs at National Security Council in the last administration, confirmed that after the Chinese transformer was taken to the national lab, quote, they found hardware that was put into that had the ability for somebody in China to switch it off. So this is insane that our country is buying Chinese transformers that run our power grid, and they discovered that there's some back door that allows some cadre over in China to press a button and turn our power grid off. In my understanding, is it that simple of an understanding? Because it seems like absolutely insane.
It's actually worse than that. To my understanding, they found more stuff on those transformers. Again, I don't know what that is, but my understanding is that there's actually more to it than just that. But that's what they've released publicly, that they have the ability to shut it down or destroy it remotely. So I mean, that's kind of a big deal. So as a direct response to that, Trump signed an executive order saying that, hey, we're not buying any more high voltage transformers or any other critical infrastructure from Chinese companies to put into our electric grid. Again, all 16 critical infrastructures in this nation rely on the electric grid. Every aspect of human life revolves around the electric grid functioning. So, I mean, it's kind of a big deal, right? So you'd think that'd be kind of a no-brainer. And when you look at these charts from this FERC filing and from his later updates, he's been tracking this since then, you can see that the following year, that it went down to 0, but basically until it took effect. So they stopped buying these transformers from this company and putting them into our electric grid. When Biden came into office, he got rid of all of Trump's executive orders. So with that said, giving them the benefit of the doubt, it wasn't like he just got rid of this one. He got rid of all of Trump's executive orders, right? Well, we petitioned strongly with the DOE and our task force and a bunch of the other organizations were like, hey, get rid of all Trump's executive orders. That's fine. But this one is a no brainer. If you want to get rid of it, just put the same thing back with your name on it. Then you can take credit for it, make it stronger, whatever. And they refused to do that. They actually played some paperwork games. So if you go to Snopes and you go to some of these, fake internet fact checking organizations, it's actually still up there that they're denying the fact that the Biden administration, the current administration, got rid of that executive order.
Folks, perhaps you'd agree with me when I say that over the past 5 years, the mainstream healthcare system's credibility has plummeted. Alternative healthcare systems that aren't beholden to medical consensus or big pharma are on the rise. Sweetamine is time tested and proven to boost your life with better health. It's one of the leading products that helps with inflammation and daily aches and pains. Just because you get older, it doesn't mean that you have to feel old. And folks, did you know that most of the diseases that make people sick and die these days are rooted in chronic inflammation, oftentimes due to glycine deficiency? So, sweetamine is composed mainly of the amino acid glycine, the nutrient that the immune system uses to regulate inflammation. So, with once daily sweetamine, most people feel the reduction in pain after just a few days. So, I challenge you to the 12-day sweetamine challenge to fight inflammation and take control of your health today. So, folks, buy sweetamine online at sweetamine.com or call 855-GET-SWEET. That's 855-438-7933, and make sure you use promo code SETH, SETH, to get a nice discount on your purchase.
Because what they did is when we petitioned them, said, hey, we need to keep this one in place. They said, okay, we're going to do a 90-day review of this situation. And we sent all kinds of information to them. A bunch of organizations sent information, said, hey, this is very serious threat. Keep this in place. So they did. Technically, that previous administration's executive order is still technically in effect, but they gutted all the language that prevents companies from buying Chinese transformers. See right there. No, Biden didn't give China control. So Snopes have never updated their record that after that 90-day review, they basically make it sound like, oh, that executive order is still in place, but the language that prevented companies from buying critical infrastructure from China, that section of the executive order was gutted out of it. So you can see from Michael Mabey's reports that all of a sudden they started ramping up again, and up to the point where like more and more electric utility companies are buying these transformers and putting them into our grid from a company that we know are building back doors into the transformers. It's not just that, it's even worse. Like JSHP, they're involved in like security meetings for NERC and some of these organizations like EEI that do security reviews for substations and power plants. They're part of that process too. They're involved in a lot of stuff, and from a company again that's JSHP USA, JSHP China, which is under control of the CCP. Why are we letting these guys, the fox inside the hen house here? So that's where we're at. They're growing and they're putting more and more. I watched a C-SPAN interview. I think it was the energy subcommittee, and NERC was there. That's the North American Energy Reliability Corporation. They're the self-regulating arm of the utilities, and we can get into that here in a second because that's crazy too. But a couple of the senators were saying, hey, what about these Chinese transformers? We've been telling you to look into this for years, and this threat, and how many of them are there? Where are they? We know, I think it's 20% of New York City. I think 40% of Las Vegas at this point is under the control of Chinese transformers from this company. And they were like, this is a big security threat. And NERC just keeps kicking the can down the road. Josh Hawley got up and like raised his voice and is like, you guys have been telling us you're looking into this. And they keep saying, oh, we're taking this real seriously. We're real concerned about this too. We're looking into it. He's like, I want to know a day. When are you giving me this report about, how infected we are with this, and what's the plan to get rid of them? Between me and your audience, we talked about it takes 36 months to get a replacement. Part of this is like not wanting to open this Pandora's box, because if they admit that there's all this infrastructure and electric utilities, they can't just turn it off and take it out, because it'd take a long time to replace this equipment. That's part of it, and that's my opinion. And in my opinion, part of the reason they're stonewalling is because I don't think the electric utility and NERC is stupid. I think they recognize this is kind of a big deal. It's a big deal to get rid of it, also to shut these transformers down and get them out of the grid. So, but with that executive order gone, we're still putting more of them in every month. It's kind of insane. It's insane.
It's just also crazy considering all the global tensions right now because well, there's a handful of folks I come across that in the comments, whatever, they're like, "Oh, the CCP is a red herring, and this is McCarthyism. This is everyone's claiming, oh, it's the communists, and it's actually the globalists or the bankers, whatever." It's like, okay, yeah, there's multiple enemies of the United States, but we can't say that the CCP isn't an enemy of the United States. I mean, go read Unrestricted Warfare, right? The book put out by the two military generals, or even I did a show recently just talking about this leaked speech from the defense minister. This is around 2000. His name was General Chi Hao Qian, with this leaked speech talking about how they need to colonize America and how that the landmass of China can't support their population and they need to colonize America, Canada, and Australia. And so, I mean, he's talking in this speech about how they need to basically get rid of between 1 and 200 million Americans. So this isn't a joke. I mean, they need our land to survive and to sustain as a race. And so when you look at that in conjunction to the fact that we're buying up all these transformers, which are, as you described, are such critical parts in our grid infrastructure, and that it's now this is, I mean, that was back in 2019, 2020, where they're coming out and saying, yeah, actually someone from China can turn off our power grid, basically. I mean, this is like the fact that this isn't on like the front of every discussion about national security is just it's mind-boggling. It's absolutely mind-boggling.
So again, I would encourage everybody to go read the actual FERC filing from Grid Security Now from Michael Mabey, because I gave you kind of the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's pictures, there's graphs. He's tracked this down, FOIA requests. It's laid out there plain and simple. When you read that, you have a hard. It's hard to look at that and be like, how could this still be happening? Right? If it's this obvious, if we know this much about this company and about what they're doing, it's just yeah. It's difficult to say.
It really is. And so, but let's take a further step back from this because obviously you are an expert in the grid and grid down scenarios, but you're also an expert in preparedness. And I'll pull your website up again just because it's helpful for our discussion. I mean, you've authored multiple fiction, nonfiction books about survival and preparedness. It was a lot of what you did in your formal your military career, right? In terms of training and training for survival skills and everything. And it's a big part of what I've learned from you. And now you've built a business on it where, high net worth individuals will come to you and say, hey, John, look, we've got $10 million. We need to build some sort of off grid retreat that's going to help us sustain, with whatever happens post election or whatever. And you can come in, and that's a big thing that you do. Actually, before I jump to the next thing, why don't you walk us through that a little bit? Like what? So like I know you're very private with the information, as you should be, but like, has someone approached you and said, look, we've got a 7-figure budget or whatever it is, or unlimited budget, and we want to design something like to kind of walk us through one of the more interesting scenarios you've run into in your work, because it's fascinating work.
Sure. So over the last decade, 12 years with my business, I've worked with over, I think, 600 high net worth families now. Over the last 2 years, it's kind of escalated to the kind of the super high net worth families, just in the aspect of I can only take so many clients. I have to pick and choose who I work with. So my book, Survival Theory and Survival Theory 2, is kind of my way to pay back the average blue collar, white collar person that's looking to prepare for something. So, I mean, that would be kind of the first step in that process. But I have never, I'll be blunt, in the last 8 months, I have never in 12 years of business seen anything like what I've seen in the last 8 months. The amount of people, I'm talking people on the Forbes 100, I'm talking the people at the very top of the ladder are freaking out, and they want this stuff done now. They have unlimited budget, 10 million, 20 million, whatever. Get me 3,000 acres and get this thing started. We want it done by November. I'm like, it ain't gonna be done by November, but we can at least get you food and safety and hardened solar and whatnot there. So it's a process, right? So somebody reaches out to me, and obviously there's an initial meeting. I want to get to know them. I want to understand their family size, their group size, or their church size, or whatever the case may be. I've worked with small towns before that have tried to copy the 1 second after thing. So I've worked with a lot of different groups, and probably I'd say 40% of my business is traveling around and looking at existing survive or family compounds, you might want to call it, and making recommendations. So that, I mean, there's a lot of high net worth families already have this over the last decade, but I much prefer to start from scratch and design everything from the bottom up, because a lot of times they make a lot of mistakes, and they're expensive mistakes to fix and rectify. And it's always tough to be like, hey, you spent $2 million on this and it's wrong and you need to redo it, right? The other issue I have, probably the top things I see with my clients is, I mean, they'll have $200,000 worth of guns and ammunition. They got $15,000 worth of food, right? And I'm like, you're kind of doing this wrong. Like, you can't eat. You have to. The one thing that you're not going to have in a long-term grid down event, I mean, you can find shelter, you can boil water, you can find a gun, right? You can figure out a lot of things. The one thing that you're not going to be able to figure out is food. Every speck of food in this country is going to be picked clean within 3 days to 3 weeks, and after that, there's no interstate trucking, there's no factories functioning. There's going to be zero food. It's going to be a famine on a biblical scale. So the one thing they really need is food, and they need that food in an underground climate controlled facility that's not in the four walls of their house. Again, a lot of people really try to build like fortresses with razor wire and all that stuff. All of my buildings have very high security. We got a lot of new high tech security, thermal radars, drones, things of that nature. High security at the building, but it doesn't look like it. It looks like anything else. Any other large, either lodge or I have a lot of my newer stuff's looking like large barns that sit in the field, but on the inside it's a beautiful timber frame, structure where all the sliding doors close over these big windows. So anybody after the fact, it just looks like a barn sitting in the field. But in truth, there's a lot of aspects to it: tunnel networks, underground storage. We want to keep the underground storage away from the four walls of the main structure, because a lot of times this is like 3 or 4 family groups. They have security teams, but there's always going to be a bigger group come. My philosophy is live to fight another day. Everybody wants to build the Alamo. You do that and you try and fight a large group, it's probably going to end the same way. My philosophy is get the women and children out, leave the facility, live to fight another day. Let them come in and honestly take the 3 to 5% of your supplies out of the house or out of the lodge. Let them move on down the road. They cleaned you out. But 98% of your supplies are underground somewhere else on the property. And you can basically move back in and kind of live to fight another day, right? So there's a lot of strategies and things that I work with these families, that's probably a bit different than what you're going to see from some of these quote unquote, prepper experts on YouTube that are kind of giving advice, but they've never done it in the past. But in a nutshell, it's been crazy. I'm a family guy. My faith is really important to me. My Christian faith. We do, Bible study every morning with my family. We homestead, we homeschool. I'm a very home centered individual. I have my home office here. I don't like being gone a lot, but for the last 8 months, I've been gone a lot, probably 4 or 5 trips a month. And I just kind of took a step back here. I told the wife, okay, we'll take a break, but it's been nuts. Everybody and their brother wants something done. They want something done now, but it is a time consuming process. So if you're out there and you've been listening and reading the signs, I'm not just talking about me, but get started now. This is a process that takes time to get all this infrastructure and stuff done. So if you've been thinking about it, don't wait too much longer, because there's a lot of things coming down the pike that could be coming soon.
So one thing just to understand what you're kind of seeing is that So basically, you're saying in the last 8 months or so that you've been approached by a significant increase in very high net worth families that are coming, and basically you're hearing commonly, "I want to get this done before November," right? So do you think that people have this sense that post election, it's kind of who knows what happens in America and I'm going to be prepared for it?
Yeah. So I mean, I would say it's been a just the last 8 months. It's been a tenfold increase over anything I've ever seen,
Wow.
even during the Obama years. It's literally been crazy. Everybody's kind of seeing the writing on the wall and looking down the road and not liking what they're seeing. So I mean, I do have a lot of people that are saying I want this done by November, right? Because they social unrest. What I do is a little different because my company model is prepare for the worst, hope for the best, let God do the rest. In my opinion, if you're going to put a lot of money into a rural retreat, rural family compound, whatever you want to call it, a vacation home, if you're going to put all this infrastructure in there, go the extra mile and make it EMP proof. Then you're ready for everything, right? Make it solar and EMP hardened and make it in such a location where if it all falls apart, it fits that bill, right? So that's really what so some of my clients will reach out to me and, hey, I think this is going to happen. I see a financial collapse coming. I see social, I see this and that. I'm like, okay, if we're going to spend this money to do this, let's do it right. And then you're covered for the worst case scenario. So
That makes sense. So, um, let's talk a little bit more about, for the average person, right, that doesn't have a $20 million budget for, survival bunker, which is probably most people right here in America. I know certainly me, right? So, and I know that it's really difficult to condense a lot of this knowledge into some easy steps. I think this is what, you've referenced, like the YouTube prepper, prepper channels, which, here's 10 things to do to survive the apocalypse. And there's this,
right.
10-piece formula that applies to everybody. Whereas it's almost like going, you go to, some website for doctors and say, if you don't feel well, here's 10 things that you can do to fix your body. It's like, well, everyone's body's different. And it's like, are you a smoker? Is that why you're sick or this? And it's like, it's much more tailored. But I will, before I let you get into some, kind of tips and tricks for folks, I will bring this back up and just say that for anybody that, and this is my own personal kind of endorsement of this, if anyone's serious about preparedness, if this interview has opened up some sort of thinking for you, or you want to learn more, this is where to start. Like, this is where I started in a big way. The book, it's on Amazon. It's on, griddownconsulting.com. Survival Theory, a Preparedness Guide. To me, this was such a good foundation. And because it's presented with the knowledge of how to prepare for an EMP, which is in many cases a almost worst case scenario, that if you understand preparedness for an EMP, you understand preparedness for a famine or so many other things that come out of that. Like, it really is prepare for the worst. So I will tell people, read the book, right? Listen to an audiobook, whatever, but get the book, read the book as the foundation. But for just, today's conversation, if someone came to you and say they're living in suburbia, right? They're in a condo in an area, or they're living in on a quarter acre in a nice neighborhood, outside of a bigger city. What are some of the, like, if you had to give someone, say, like a 15-minute kind of, here's some advice for you to frame how to basically protect your family better and how to get through mass turmoil and unrest, what would you tell people?
15 minutes. That's like trying to cram an iceberg into a shipping container. But yeah, well, not to put you on the spot. Have you read Survival Theory 2 yet?
Yes, yes. Which was,
Okay.
if I recall,
So
it was a few years ago, but I recall that it was much more. It was a lot of your report that you made, right, going into the history of famine and explaining, like, the Holodomor and everything. Is that right?
sure. Yes. So Survival Theory 2, the first third of that is a report that you can get a hard copy on Amazon, but I give it away for free on my website. You can download the full 122-page report for free because I wanted everybody to have it. But if you want a physical copy, you can get it on Amazon. It's called Grid Down: Death of a Nation. And after my time at the Electromagnetic Defense Task Force, they asked me to write a report on the after effects of an EMP and starvation. And that's kind of my wheelhouse. That's a lot of my research. Yeah, that's it right there. So that is my number one thing I want people to read. If I could get
Okay.
everybody in the country to read that, and it's free. You can download it for free on my website, because it spells out how the thing most of these quote unquote prepper experts online don't get is the effects of starvation psychosis. So that report is the psychology and the physiology of human desperation, starvation, living in a world without rule of law. There's a lot of historical narrative in there from past famines, from the Holodomor, the Chinese famine, the Warsaw Ghetto, the in Bosnia, the Bengal famine. It discusses firsthand accounts. It's really important because what you have to understand is you have two big threats in a long-term grid down event. The two things that are outside of your control, if you don't plan ahead of time. The first one is food. Again, I alluded to this earlier. You can figure out water, unless you're in Arizona, but you can figure out water. You can figure out protection. You can get a place to tuck yourself away in. But the problem is food. The food infrastructure that feeds 330 million Americans spread out across this large landmass, it stops and it shuts down. And once those grocery stores are empty and once those factories are raided, there's no more food. And that's the problem, is people don't have the life skills to figure out. And I hear all the time, well, I'm going to garden my way through it. Well, you do realize it takes between 65 and 80 days for your stuff to even grow, to harvest. Do you have enough area to make it through an entire winter? Do you know how large of a garden you need for your family to get through to the next harvest season? There's a lot of factors here where people that they throw these things out there, but they don't understand the ramifications and the fact that the people that crossed the Great Divide had life skills that we only dream about, right? So I'm sorry, I'm going down a rabbit trail here. I highly recommend that Grid Down Definition. It's an eye-opening piece of information to show you two things. One, you have to be able to you have to have food. The other thing is people. People are the starving, desperate people are a major threat. And I see all these urban prepping channels that talk about, you can hide, become the gray man, hide in plain sight in the city, throw trash in your front yard and put a 6-foot privacy fence and garden in your backyard. Like none of your neighbors are going to figure this stuff out. It's terrible. That if you get nothing else from what you're hearing, your two biggest chances of living through this type of scenario is having a fair amount, at least a year's worth of freeze-dried long-term rice and beans, whatever you're doing, whatever you can fit in your budget, having a year's worth of food somewhere tucked away outside of the city, and getting out of the city quickly within the first 3 days before things really fall apart, before it's too dangerous to travel on the open road. I can't hammer this enough. Get out of the cities, get out of the suburban areas. And then that comes to your question. Well, what about the guy that can't afford a 10 or $15 million survival retreat? I get that. I understand that. I lived that life for quite a few years, a decade or more ago. So that's where kind of my books, Survival Theory 1, Survival Theory 2, Survival Theory 2 especially, I lay out 5 different strategies for somebody on very minimal budget on how to make a plan to do this. Just to give here's one example. Okay, so these aren't great, but you don't have any other option, right? You don't have the financial ability to put something like this together. I'll give you one example. I tell people that, you live in a city, you live in suburbia. There's a lot, it's real popular now, these bed and breakfasts that are like farm to table. They got goats and chickens, they make their own cheese and they have their own milk. And they're typically out in rural areas. Do some research and try and find 1 or 2 of these locations that are within like a 2 or 3 hour drive of you. And then kind of go there and get to know the people. Go there once a month, you and your wife, get away. Don't mention prepping. Don't mention the end of the world. Just get to know them. See if you can find out details like, oh, do you have a large family? Oh, tell me, show them pictures of your kids, ask about their kids. If they have 12 kids and they all live in town, the place is probably going to be full when the time comes, right? But, a lot of people retire and they'll start these things and their kids have moved off. So just get to know those people. And if it's a good location that's tucked away, that kind of falls in with survival retreat, end of a dead end road, somewhere rural that's not on a major busy road, find the nearest climate controlled storage unit next to that place and put your food and supplies in that storage unit. And then when the time comes, just show up there on day 1 and just say, oh, we were traveling. Hey, can we just grab a room? Hopefully by then, if there was somebody staying there, they've left, and then just stay there for a day or two after the grid comes down. Don't jump straight into, again, prepping. It's the end of the world. Just kind of get in a routine, help them out, do some things around there, help them guard whatever. Um, and then break the news to them, right? Have a sit down, come to Jesus moment and say, hey, this is what's going on. I've got food, I've got guns, supplies. I can, can we stay with you? Okay. So a lot of people are sitting there thinking that really stinks. I don't like that idea. That there's a lot of question marks in that plan. Um, I'd rather be there than in my safe space, my home in suburbia, as the city falls apart around me, and there's more people than food, and the food's going to disappear really quick. There's not going to be the water's going to stop. The septic's going to back up into a lot of the houses in the city. They're not even going to be livable with the methane coming in there. You're going to have people that are just out of their mind, desperate. Their kids are starving to death. What aren't they willing to do for food? I don't want to be around those people. I want to get somewhere rural. So if you have a Uncle Charlie's farm, do the same thing with that. Even if he's like some far left, guy, don't tell him what you're doing. Just, park your stuff in a storage unit nearby, and then just show up when the day comes, and you'll look really smart, a day or two after the event, when you kind of lay everything out.
So basically, one of the key advice, kind of distilling that is food, right? And of course, water is important, but as you mentioned, water is going to be easier to like deal with in the long run because you've got river systems and everything. Now, obviously, learning how to purify water, whether it's through boiling or whether it's through like a life straw or Berkey, et cetera, collecting rainwater, but food, but beyond that, this seems like location, right? Location. And
Yeah.
if you're in an area, and that's one thing I got from your books as well, that if you live in a densely populated area, um, it's over time. Now we're looking at like a worst case scenario here, right? Grid down scenario, et cetera.
Worse,
That
that's key, Seth. What we're talking about here is a total collapse event. We're not talking about hurricane season. We're not talking about a short term, some rioting and looting because of a bad election or something. We're not talking about that. I'm talking about a long term collapse event brought on by a loss of electric grid, a very deadly bioweapon or something along those lines that happens in this country. So a couple clarifications. A lot of people buy food, but they put it in their house in town. You're just feeding the local warlord at some point. Your food is going to be feeding somebody else. I can guarantee you. At some point, somebody bigger or stronger or a bigger group's going to come along, and they're going to take your food. They're going to figure out that you're the only one that's not getting skinny like everyone else. You're not going to keep that food if you're stocking up in town. And I want to throw one other thing out here. It's not, there's a lot of people online that are going to give you a 10-step plan. They're going to reassure you, hey, you're on a budget. Here's 5 easy things to survive the apocalypse. These are the top 10 things to loot at the store the day after. They're going to tell you all these things. I'm going to be one of the few people to sit here and tell you, and I'm going to be blunt. If you don't put any money into this, if you're like living paycheck to paycheck, you've got nothing to put into this, I'm going to be honest and say you're going to have a very hard time surviving this scenario. Okay. So a lot of people are going to they're going to tickle your ears and tell you what you want to hear. And there's a lot of people that have spent a lot of money on their house in suburbia, and they're going to join forces with their neighbors. Meanwhile, other neighbors have stored up food, right? They're going to do this or that. There's not a lot of people out there that are telling you, like, if you don't take steps, even if they're uncomfortable steps, you're probably not going to survive this scenario. We're talking about 90% of the population dead within the first year. That's 9 out of 10 people. And the other 10% are going to be a lot of times it's going to be rural people. And if it's not rural people, it's going to be people. I think Dr. Peter Pry used to joke, or might have been Ambassador Woozy used to joke and say, 90% of the people are going to die, and you don't really want to be around the other 10%. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's the people that know how to survive at all costs, right? Like it's when the jails
Yeah.
escape. It's the roaming gangs and again, and I'm glad you mentioned it. It's worth mentioning. This is worst case scenario, right? Now,
Worst
when
case
we,
scenario.
we might say there's not necessarily a grid down. So like the whole 90% thing, that's if the grid gets destroyed and we're waiting on it to
Yep.
be rebuilt. But there could be a cyber attack that pulls the grid offline for 2 weeks, right? Or for a month. And so in that case, right, let's just say that the grid goes down for 3 weeks. Okay, maybe being in your house in suburbia is sustainable, right? You hunker down and you get through it, and power comes back on, and rule of order is rule of law is brought into place again. But you're looking at like worst case scenario here. At the very heart of our democracy lies a principle we hold sacred: free speech. It's the cornerstone that supports every freedom we cherish. Yet, in today's digital age, discussions about our wealth, our rights, and our future are being silenced or overshadowed in mainstream narratives, leaving many feeling voiceless in conversations crucial to our financial independence and security. This is where wealth protection research steps in, armed with a mission that's never been more critical. Wealth protection research is not a financial advisory firm. They're defenders of free speech committed to giving a voice to the silenced. Wealth protection research tirelessly seeks out financial experts. These are the voices that challenge prevailing narratives, especially as we navigate the uncertainties of the 2024 election. Wealth protection research has created a 2024 election wealth protection report. This free report highlights the 3 best ideas for protecting and growing your money heading into the 2024 election. It contains ideas the mainstream media won't even touch, and listeners can get it completely free. So text ideas to 76626 to claim your free copy. If you believe in the sanctity of free speech and the importance of financial freedom, then act now. So text ideas to 76626 to claim your free copy of this 2024 election protection report. It's time to widen the scope of what we're told, to hear the ideas the establishment does not think you can handle, and to take control of our financial destinies. So, folks, today, text ideas to 76626 to claim your free copy.
So even if the cyber attack takes the grid down for 3 weeks, from day 3 to day 21, I don't want to be anywhere near the
Good
city.
point.
Okay. There was a great documentary. I think it was Discovery or National Geographic. It was called American Blackout. It's really hard to find these days. It was done around 8 years ago, and it showed the immediate aftermath of a grid cyber attack that brought down the grid. Right. And within day 3, people are trapped in elevators, and it falls like 3 or 4 different people. One of them that falls is a prepper, stereotypical flat top, wearing BDU pants, right? Kind of wacky. They always paint preppers as wacky people. But it goes through a bunch of different scenarios. I mean, there's a scene in there on day 3 where like people are fighting over like the last stuff at the corner store, and one guy gets his head caved in with a can of peaches, fighting over it with somebody else. And so yeah, that's it. It's really hard to find. And I don't know where you could find to watch it, but the point is they painted the picture pretty well. Where they got it wrong was that I think it was like a 3-week event, and at the end of 3 weeks, there's this climactic scene. And spoiler alert, but the prepper group there's a bunch of farm people that are around there that are like country people that are getting ready to attack their compound, and all of a sudden they don't never explain why, but all of a sudden the lights come back on, and there's this final battle. It's this tense scene, and then the lights come on, and everyone's like, oh, okay, and they just kind of walk back home and go back to driving their Priuses to Starbucks for coffee the next day. It's like, that's not how this works. When society falls apart that far, mass mayhem, you don't just pull it back from that point. Another book, the number one outside, obviously outside of my books, but the number one book recommendation that I recommend to people is a book called The Dark Secrets of SHTF by Selko Begovic. Because again, it is a mental exercise. A guy that lived through you could call it a grid down event in the late 90s in Bosnia. The city was basically surrounded. They cut all the power and electric to the city, and the city was left for a year to it ate itself alive, right? Street by street, clan by clan. Eventually, warlords took over, and he has firsthand accounts. People think like America's different and everyone's going to hold hands and sit in a circle, sing kumbaya, and everything's going to be just fine. That's not how it's going to play out. It will become Mad Max, pretty quick. We will be Viking days, survival of the fittest within 2 to 3 weeks of a big event like this that's nationwide. So again, this is really doomsday. I get it. Every time you have me on here, I end up probably scaring half your audience away. But the point is you have to wrap your brain. If you can wrap your brain around the world to come and get outside of normalcy bias, everybody wants to make their future plans thinking that conversations in the future are going to be normal. There's going to be police. So there's going to be, they have all these normal things in a world that makes sense, and they make their plans based on their world today. And they can't envision the world that they're making their plans for. So they're making incorrect plans for a world that's not going to exist when they get there.
It's an interesting just topic, cognitive dissonance, the avoidance of the uncomfortable, the normalcy bias. America's always been like this, therefore it always will be like this. And for me, like actually this book that you mentioned, I've got this book, right? The Dark Secrets of SHTF. And he's even talking about the value of a lighter, right? What it means if you have a single lighter,
Yeah.
right? I think I've got 300 Bic lighters in my stock, right? Because I'm thinking, okay, well,
Right.
300 Bic lighters, like, one lighter could be traded for, 3 chickens, right? Or this is how things work. Or like silver, right? Now, of course, silver it takes time for some sort of normalcy to come back
Yeah.
where, but one of the first currencies, past bartering will be, silver and gold, bring a base precious metal. You pull out, a bunch of dollars. It's like, well, those are worthless. Those were worthless on day 3, right? Once everyone realized
it ain't going to get you anything the first year or two, but when society starts coming back around, starting year 3, yeah, that's the paper dollar is not going to be worth the paper it's printed on at that point. That's going to go away really fast. So the gold and silver has been the currency for a long period of time here. So hedge against inflation and long-term survival outlook. Absolutely. I'm all about silver and gold, but I do tell clients that if you need food first, right? So there's certain things you should get first before you start stocking up for 3 years down the road.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
my personal opinion.
I agree completely. It's always, okay, it's like, okay, if you got only $1,000 to put towards something, don't buy any precious metals, right? Make sure you've got your food, go buy a cheap gun, learn how to use it, right? So your food, the ability to keep that food secure, et cetera. So I want to bring up just your website one last time as we're rounding out our discussion. I'll put a lot of these links into the description. This link specifically I'll put in there so folks can download this. Highly recommend that. So it's griddownconsulting.com. Folks can follow you on social media. You have your links up top there. And yeah, I mean, I'm sorry this is, to the audience, not to you, but this isn't more of a doom and gloom thing. But honestly, like we almost just witnessed, a presidential candidate, former president, having his head blown up on live TV by a sniper, right? Like this is the reality that we live in. And, a week before that, if I could have been saying, hey folks, like, how are you going to handle it if there's a public assassination of a key figure that, you might support or whatever? It's like, hey, that's, fear mongering, whatever. And then it happens. And so like, I would rather, like, I love reading these topics. I love getting into and understanding this because the more I read about it, the less I worry about it, because there obviously there's a worry from being aware of it, but I'm more scared of the things I'm not watching and I don't understand. That's what frightens me more. But if I know the signs to look for, if there's a grid down scenario, and it's like, okay, within a few minutes I can check and it's not a power outage, it's not this, like the car won't start, there's some, EMP. The more I know, the more I feel like I'm being prepared and I'm more responsible. So I'd rather not put my head in the sand. One thing I will mention, just another book series, is 1 Second After. I've also listened to this book series. I think I've listened to this whole series 3 times, I think. But 1 Second After by William Forstchen is another very, very good fiction series that similar to your EMP, Equipping Modern Patriots. It's very similar from the perspective that it's a fiction. It's there's characters and there's a story and it's a plot, but it's littered with advice and scenarios and information that you can pull a lot out of. So I recommend that one as well.
And he's a New York Times bestselling author. He's a good author too. So
he is. Yeah.
He paints the picture really well. The story is really great. It is I talk about that Selko Begovic book being my number one recommendation. But on the fiction side, 1 Second After, William Forster, without question, is the most popular, and it is one of the best written. And there's very few in the prepper fiction that I recommend or even read. But with that said, if you do buy that book or if you have read that book, pay attention to one thing. Towards the end of the book, and I'm not giving away really any spoilers, there is a time jump. Okay. So the EMP happens and it gets to a certain period of time, and there's a time jump from like the dead of winter till spring. And then so there's like this 4 or 5 month time jump. And this is a town of like 350 people, I think, are surviving. The average person eats 1 metric ton of food a year. So that mayor of that town would have to supply that town 1 metric ton of food to keep those people fed every single day. That's 7 metric tons of food in a world with no food. So love William Forstchen, running the same circles with him. But with that said, there's a time jump that's a big black hole that you can't explain how you fed this town for this long period of time. So again, that goes back to my advice. Don't underestimate food. You have to have long-term food if you're on a budget. One of the best places right now, I'll give you a little trade secret, is the Mormon Church, the LDS Ready Store. During COVID, and a lot of people were stocking up, and I've told you how a lot of people are kind of freaking out and gearing up. Long-term food has probably tripled in price in the last 5 or 6 years. The LDS has kept their prices the same. So you can buy cases of number 10 cans of, they're limited. So you only have like 21 options, but you can get rice and beans and pasta elbows and freeze-dried onions and things like that. Buy the case of number 10 can, super cheap, and they charge $5 shipping. I've had a client get a whole pallet of, actually it was 2 pallets, and it was still $5 shipping. So I would recommend to go there if you're looking at food. The last thing the point I would make is the government's not coming. I was just meeting with the military readiness subcommittee 2 weeks ago. Okay. There's no military plans to deal with a nationwide grid down event. There is no FEMA plan to deal with a nationwide grid down event. There's no plan at the federal government or the state governments to deal with a nationwide grid down event. If any of these events happens, I'm telling you right now, the military will cease to exist within 3 or 4 weeks. The 98% of them. I'm sure there are going to be pockets somewhere. The government will cease to exist. FEMA, my point is, nobody's coming to feed you at some point. That's what you have to understand. Nobody's coming to feed the American people. You're never, and so a lot of the fiction stories, those military trucks, the convoys that you see in the movies passing out MREs, driving down the streets, never going to happen. The military does not have a plan to feed their own troops, let alone their troops' dependents. That's part of my report. If you read Survival Theory 2 or the Grid Down Death of a Nation report, I have a whole chapter on just the logistics of feeding the U.S. military and their families after this type of event and how they would even go about that. But anyways, Seth, it's been a pleasure, brother. Let me know anytime. I'm happy to come on and talk Chinese Transformers or whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, obviously, it's hard to. Okay, I wouldn't say it's enjoyable. I mean, it is enjoyable. I mean, it's a heavy subject, but it's important. It's important information, right? It needs to be discussed, and you're a great guest for this. And so again, I'll put your website up one last time. I'm going to put the links in the description. So griddownconsulting.com. It's a main website. Also, there's links to your Facebook, your YouTube, Instagram, Twitter on there, etc. Jonathan, thank you so much for what you're doing. Thank you for helping raise awareness about this. And my perspective is that I would rather be 3 years too early or even 10 years too early than 1 day too late. Right. And so like the food that I've got set aside, a lot of it's 25 year. We bought a freeze dryer. So we freeze dry a lot of our own food. That's the ultimate way to eventually it pays off, right? Not for the first couple of years of doing it. But my perspective is that if I set aside food that's going to be put aside for that'll last up to 20, 25 years, if I don't use it for the entirety of that time, then I'm the luckiest man alive. I never had to tap into it. But if 15 years from now, even let alone in 15 months or 15 weeks from now, something happens, I know that I've got enough to keep my family going, and that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, you don't want to be in that position 3 weeks into one of these events, whatever the case may be, and you're huddled in the corner with your family, no heat, no air conditioning, no food, your kids are starving, and you're thinking back to all these conversations you've heard in the past about it. And a lot of people out there saying, yeah, I should probably do something about that. But everybody looks at it as a low probability event and this will never happen. Um, yeah, I'm surprised it hasn't happened already. We just May 10th and 12th, large solar flare, G5 solar flare. It was on low end, right? But we're entering a solar maximum. The next 18 months is a solar maximum in an 11-year cycle. There's just a lot of things. So the cyber threats, like look what just happened with the CrowdStrike.
Yeah.
They have the ability, cyber wise, to shut us down if they wanted to. Russia, China, they all do. Just like we can shut them down cyber attack wise. There's a lot of threats that you just don't hear a lot about, but they can radically transform your life real quick. And if you can't
Yeah.
feed your kids, you're going to feel pretty bad about yourself when the time comes. So, yeah. Anyways, man, it's a pleasure being on, and we'll talk to you again next go around.
Awesome, man. Take care and God bless, Jonathan. Good talking to you.
You too. Same here.
Way to. So, folks, if you got to the end of the interview, I'm guessing it wasn't too much for you to bear. I know these are tough topics, right? And it's sobering to have these discussions, especially with an expert, because Jonathan, he's not out there to, kind of blow air at you. He's trying to give you the hard truth. Like, this is the reality, folks. And it comes across as doom and gloom, but I'd rather be aware of the potential doom and gloom. Now, I'm not going to dwell on it. And like most of my shows aren't doom and gloom, but it's important that we take these steps back sometimes and say, okay, hey, where are we at? Where are the risks at? Because these scenarios are very real. And like we just saw what happened with Trump, where there's a attempted assassination. So the bad actors, the deep state, these, elites, which is, really a word I don't like using with them, they will do anything to maintain their power. And food, famine, civil unrest, these are the tools that they use. These are the tools that tyrants have used throughout history to control the population. And famine is one of the big ones that they've always used, right? By limiting food. It's like, okay, it's really easy to say, you know what? I'm not going to take your experimental jab. I'm not going to do any of this. I'm not going to, kind of participate in your system. But if your kids are starving, you're going to do a lot, right? If you have to go get some sort of injection in order to get the passport so you can go to the bread line so you can actually get food to bring your family, you'll do that if it means not seeing your children starve. So it's a tough balance, but this is why it's so important to have a food supply. Now, I've oftentimes said, look, 3 to 6 months is a good baseline. I'd say at least 3 months. Like, do your own assessment. You should have at least 3 months worth of food for every person in your household. And I'm talking 2,000 calories a day of decent food, right? He recommends a year, which I also, obviously it depends on your budget, but look, if today you can afford to set aside a year's worth of food, you're going to sleep easy at night with doing that. Now, there's a lot of these food bucket companies. There's been a massive surge in these new companies selling food buckets. But so what a lot of them do, though, which you have to be wary of this, is that they add in really bad filler, like Kool-Aid type stuff or pudding, or they add in high calorie junk, because what it does is that if you're price shopping, you're saying, oh, well, this bucket company, they're only like 30 cents a calorie. The other company is 50 cents a calorie. But what you don't realize is that it's cheap because the food in there is cheap, right? And so this is why, for me personally, the number one company is Heaven's Harvest, right? So Heaven's Harvest, this company right here, number one company, in my opinion, if you want to buy storable food. They're Christian patriots. I think they're out of Georgia. I know both the husband and the wife that run the company, great people. But if you look at this, here's their website. They've got the emergency survival kits, right? You can get like the 1 week kit. You can get you do it by serving. They have organic kits, right? So it shows their commitment to quality, because like very few places actually sell organic. So if that's important to you, they've got organic. They have water treatment. They've got the classic number 10 cans, right? So, number 10 can freeze dried corn, mashed potatoes, broccoli. They've got the meat kits. They even have seeds, right? This is another thing we didn't talk about in the interview, but having seeds, even this heirloom vegetable seed kit, right? It's $140 for the heirloom seed kit. That could be a lifesaver. One of these seed kits over the course of a couple of years of growing and saving seeds could feed an entire village, right? So what are these worth in a situation where you can't go out and buy them like we're used to right now? So this is the place I recommend, honestly. Now, if you're buying just like bulk rice and bulk flour and you know how to properly store it, that's also great. But having these freeze dried food buckets is great because it gives you variety in your diet. You get, variety in your nutrients, everything like that. And so my recommendation is just to do an assessment, right? Look at your food you have set aside. How long will you last? If tomorrow you can't buy food anymore, how long will you be able to feed your family before you're forced to go to the government or whatever it means to then feed your family? So the website for them is Heaven's Harvest. It's heavensharvest.com. It's also, we've got a great promo code. So you save 15% on your entire order if you use a promo code Seth. So this is in the description below. So SETH Seth promo code, you'll save 15%. And again, it's high quality food because this is one of the keys is that you think, oh, well, as long as I've got some food, right? And I see us thinking people like that they're storing away like Rice Krispie treats and Fruit Loops and SpaghettiOs. And it's like, well, at least it's calories. I'm not going to starve. But if you have the foresight right now to think about the future, honestly, during a time like that, you will need even better quality and healthier food than you do right now because your body's going to be under a lot of stress. You're not going to have the doctor's office that just is easy to walk into. So the quality of your food is even more important in a more disastrous scenario, which is why I don't think it's wise to just skimp and just go on price and say, look, I'll buy a lot of the cheapest possible. Right. And this is again why I recommend Heaven's Harvest. So again, folks, it's heavensharvest.com and promo code Seth, SETH. Growing and at the very heart of our democracy lies a principle we hold sacred, free speech. It's the cornerstone that supports every freedom we cherish. Yet in today's digital age, discussions about our wealth, our rights, and our future are being silenced or overshadowed in mainstream narratives, leaving many feeling voiceless in conversations crucial to our financial independence and security. This is where wealth protection research steps in, armed with a mission that's never been more critical. Wealth Protection Research is not a financial advisory firm. They're defenders of free speech committed to giving a voice to the silenced. Wealth Protection Research tirelessly seeks out financial experts. These are the voices that challenge prevailing narratives, especially as we navigate the uncertainties of the 2024 election. Wealth Protection Research has created a 2024 Election Wealth Protection Report. This free report highlights the 3 best ideas for protecting and growing your money heading into the 2024 election. It contains ideas the mainstream media won't even touch, and listeners can get it completely free. So text IDEAS to 76626 to claim your free copy. If you believe in the sanctity of free speech and the importance of financial freedom, then act now. So text IDEAS to 76626 to claim your free copy of this 2024 Election Protection Report. It's time to widen the scope of what we're told, to hear the ideas the establishment does not think you can handle, and to take control of our financial destinies. So folks, today, text IDEAS to 76626 to claim your free copy.